Hi everyone, and welcome to Design Unlocked, a weekly showcase of 2020 graduates from the University of Dundee and Aberdeen University. Today's session is being hosted and organised by members of V&A Dundee's Young People's Collective. So today we have Lucy with us, and myself, Lizzie.
We'll start telling you a little about what we do, then introduce today's graduate to you all. V&A Dundee is the first ever dedicated design museum in Scotland and the only other V&A museum anywhere else in the world outside London. The museum provides a place of inspiration, discovery and learning, and its mission is to enrich lives through design. The Young People's Collective, or YPC as we're known, was formed in 2017, a year before the museum opened to the public. The group ranges from 14 to 24-year-olds, and we meet throughout the year every Thursday evening to get involved with lots of co-design processes and consult with the museum teams on key decisions representing young people's voices. Over the past 3 years, we've led different kinds of projects and programs. Before we even had a museum building, we started by meeting weekly off-site to consult on what the future programs for young people should include. We co-designed V&A Dundee's opening 3D festival concert alongside a light and sound installation, all in the heart of the city. Since then, we've gone on to test and curate the events delivered for and sometimes by young people. We interpret themes within the museum spaces and exhibitions in ways that are relevant and interesting to us. Our group doesn't attend a program that has been designed for us by someone else. We contribute ideas together and design our program to make it work for us.
Amazing. So Design Unlocked is a series of discussions with 2020 graduates from Aberdeen University and the University of Dundee that have been chosen by YPC to elaborate on their practice. We wanted to give designers a space to showcase their practice, elaborating on their digital degree show presentations. Some design projects are especially challenging to display on digital platforms, and hopefully this conversation will allow a continued dialogue, letting us learn about each designer's processes in their own voices. So today's graduate is Ewan Flynn, a product design graduate from the University of Dundee. Ewan is a designer with a passion for innovative and beautiful design, as well as being an advocate of universal design. For the degree show, Ewan developed the Game Changer, a modular adaptive controller that aims to give everyone the chance to play video games regardless of disability. Welcome, Ewan. It's amazing to have you along today. We'll get started by asking you some introductory questions about your practice and project, and then move into some more individual questions as well.
Okay, thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you so much for being here. Lucy, let's go for it.
Okay. So, what does a day in the life look like for you currently? What's your process?
So at the moment, well, when I graduated, at the height of COVID, the job market didn't have a lot of options. So I decided to instead of going to work at like Tesco or something like that, I would try and improve upon my skill set, and I decided to go and do a master's at the University of Dundee in design for business. So I am currently still a student, but it's interesting being a student at the same university during and pre-COVID, because like there's a lot of people in my class that are from far and wide. Like I'm doing a group project at the moment, and in my group there's somebody from Germany and there's somebody from China and somebody who's currently living in Edinburgh. So when you're doing group work like that, it's obviously a lot of, as we've learned now, Teams calls or Zoom meetings or whatever systems they're trying to get in place now. And there's a lot of new video software to learn. But if I was to say what my day would look like tomorrow, for example, there's obviously a couple options. I'm working from home a lot, but I have got the option to go into the university. We've been given a rota, and there's only 4 people allowed in the studio at a time. But that, socially distancing and wearing a mask around the university and things like that is commonplace. You have to do it all the time. And yeah, it's a lot of working on the laptop, whereas um, before in my undergraduate, I liked to get my hands dirty, so to speak, and get into the workshops and get making things. But now, again, with COVID, a lot of the workshops you have to book a space, and there has to be social distancing involved, and it just makes it all a lot less accessible for people. And well, and doing design for business as well is not there's not a lot of scope to go in and go into the woodworking workshop and make something.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's what my day looks like at the moment.
Yeah, it's a change totally, and I guess this question leads on with that really nicely. Is sort of how have you had to adapt your design process over lockdown and the whole COVID situation?
No, um, I as I say, it's a lot of working on calls, and I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment is organizing when to meet in a group, because as I said, there's people in China or Germany or um, even other places in Scotland that people can't come in because different tiers for lockdown, they can't travel between them, and people are anxious about that, obviously. A good example of that is in the first few weeks of the course, I was working on a team. We'd organised to meet after a lecture at 5 o'clock, and we were working away, and it got to about, I can't remember, it must have been 6, 7, 8 o'clock, and we were just chatting before we all hung up and went and had a dinner or whatever. And one of the girls was saying that she was in China, and it was 2 in the morning when we'd finished working.
Wow.
So it's a long day, and just trying to be mindful of other people's lives is difficult when um everyone's out of everyone's not got like a schedule that you can easily place side by side. Everyone's like a few hours out or whatever. So, but yeah, it is interesting. Like there's positives and negatives to it. I think in my undergraduate, I was seeing a lot of negatives when COVID immediately came out. But yeah, going from the more uh, going to speak to people. Like one of my big things is I like to go and speak to people about my design. Like in my undergraduate, I would, if I was having trouble with something, I could go to the next desk over and talk through a problem with one of my friends and get their point of view. And a lot of the time, they were able to point out something like, "Oh, you've not thought about this." I'm going, "Oh, that's a really good point," and then move forward in that. And you could get in my undergraduate classes, what, 40 people, and being able to get 40 different opinions on your design is really really beneficial. But now it's a wee bit more difficult to come by. So yeah, that's one of the negatives of it. But being able to roll out of bed and jump into a class is also a big positive. So swings and roundabouts.
What's the story and inspiration behind your degree show project?
Okay. So at the coming up with a concept without a brief for your degree show project at the start is quite a difficult thing to do. Well, I find so anyway. And I in my previous years I had done a lot of um, disability design because I feel like even just walking around in town in Dundee, you can spot a lot of places that people with disabilities would struggle to use, and that's obviously a big part of the problem of lockdown as well at the moment. Is that people with disabilities can struggle to navigate like one-way systems, and then if you have a visual impairment, that can be near next to impossible to navigate. So yeah, that was one of my like key interests at the start, and I also um I wanted to add in I wanted to add in something that was a passion of mine, and for as long as I can remember, I've been playing on Xbox and PlayStation and whatever. and I wanted to integrate that, but I didn't really know how at the beginning. And well, to be honest with you, I was trying to figure out which one I was wanting to go with, and then went and spoke to one of the technicians in MakeSpace in DJCAD, and it seems so simple looking back at it, but he pointed out to me, why don't you integrate them both and make a games controller that is accessible to people with disabilities? And it was sort of like a light bulb moment for me. And it's going back to one of the points I made in the previous question, where speaking to people can be a really helpful tool in design process. Because if I hadn't gone down to speak to him, I was on my way to go and get some lunch, and I stopped and spoke to him.
I guess again leads on really nicely is who are your influences, and do you have a favorite creative?
See, I've thought about this a lot throughout my 4 years in undergrad, because I didn't have much of a what people would call an arty background before I joined product design. Like I had when I was a kid, I decided I wanted to be an engineer, and wanted to build bridges, and I um, I went into the engineering department at Dundee University first, and then moved over to product design. And one of the things I always compared myself with my peers was that if the lecturer had a slideshow up of loads of different designs, people in my class were always like, "Oh, that's so and so," or "that's that person," and I'd be like, "I have no idea." But like through um, through my through my undergrad, one of the things I've tend to be drawn to is, I hope I'm saying this right, George. I forgot his last name. Carwardine. Sorry, is that his name? George Carwardine. Well, George Carwardine, he invented the poise lamp with the springs.
Oh yeah.
Maneuver about. And one of the things I like about that is that it doesn't apologize for what it is, and it's really usable. You can maneuver it however you want it to be used, and it's just something that it wasn't intended to look beautiful, and it was intended to do a job. And I feel like in design, that's one of the most important things for me, is that whatever I make, I want it to be useful to somebody. I want it to help them do something. And if it's beautiful in the end, then that's a bonus. And I would like to make it beautiful, but if it's not beautiful, and as long as it does the job, that's what's important for me. So yeah, that George Carwardine is somebody I always looked up to.
Do you have any advice for individuals looking to go into product design?
Well, as I was saying earlier, like I didn't really have any design skills. Well, not that I would have identified as design skills before I went into product design. And I think one of my bits of advice would be like not to let that be a barrier. Maybe I was lucky to get in the product design course with what I had done previously, but yeah, it's you go into product design at university to learn, and they're not expecting you to have all these different skills. And there's, like, for example, like computer aided design. There's a lot of people that I know who've graduated from product design that it's not one of their skills, and people seem to think that CAD is a huge part of what we do. And obviously, you have to use it at some point, but not being a wizard at it. That's not going to stop you. If you know what I mean.
That's so fair. Jumping into the specific questions, can your design be adapted for different disabilities?
Yeah, well, I would like to think so. I During my design process, I was recommended to, well, by many people, by many of the lecturers, that I should choose a specific user group. Whereas I wanted to design something that like literally everybody could use, which is so choosing a specific user group was difficult for me because, you know, as I've said, but yeah, I ended up cerebral palsy is the user group I ended up choosing because um, well, it's kind of a twofold answer. At the time, this might seem really silly, but at the time I was watching, the name slipped my mind at the moment, but there's a sitcom where the main character is a boy with cerebral palsy, and he has a little board that he points a laser to communicate. And I just found that really interesting, and um, how people communicate in different ways. Um, that's just a topic of interest for me overall. And then during my Guru's Day, where we had experts coming to speak to us about our design, one of our one of the gurus told me that there was a group in the Queen Mother building, which is a computing building at the University of Dundee, that were investigating communication aids for people with cerebral palsy. So I I was able to get in contact with that group and speak to them about my design as well. But yeah, I I would I've designed it too, and I would hope it would be easily usable for a lot of people. And I also got a lot of after COVID, when I was unable to get in contact with the, the the research group I was part of. I I put um, I put a post on Reddit asking for people to tell me, just give me their feedback on the design. There's a subreddit called Disabled Gamers, so I put a post in there, and quite a few people messaged me, and I would send them an email with a quick explanation of what my design was intended to be, and a few photographs of it, and nobody that responded to that suffered from cerebral palsy, but there's quite a few people with a wide variety of disabilities that were quite positive about it. There was one or two obviously that saying, "Oh, I've got this specific issue. I can't use this in this way," and that's always going to happen. As much as you might try, you can't design for absolutely everybody. So, but yeah, there's a lot of positive feedback from a lot of different people with a lot of different disabilities. So that was a really long-winded question. I hope.
No, that's really super interesting to sort of learn the different levels to it, and like obviously the depth of research that you have gone into to learn more about it.
Are there any other areas in gaming that you feel can be adapted for other disabilities, physical and non-physical? Can other aspects of gaming be more accessible?
Okay. I, I think everything can always be more accessible. To, Talking about it more personally, is I a couple of years ago I was diagnosed as dyslexic. So in my specific diagnosis with dyslexia is my reading. So it takes me a wee bit longer to read things than most people. Like for example, if I'm playing a game with my partner, she's a really quick reader. She'll read a sentence, and she'll get her phone out and wait for me to finish reading the paragraph that's been displayed on the screen or whatever. So yeah, I think there's always room for. I'm not sure how you would improve that, but yeah, um, I think for me that's something that I struggled with, and I struggled with when I was a kid before I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I just never really noticed it because it was just my existence. But and there's plenty of like my partner also she wears glasses, and she can struggle to read text on the screen in some games. And in some games you can't alter the size of the text, which I find strange because it's not exactly a difficult thing to do. So yeah, it's just small things like that. Nothing else is really popping into my head. And I'm sure in like a week's time I'll go, oh, she's spoken about that. But yeah, I think that's about everything I can think of at the moment.
No, that's interesting because we're actually speaking to our designer next week. Is a video games coder, so that will be an interesting thing to maybe bring up with him. And again, designs, what does your design do that other accessible controllers don't?
I think that's a question I should be able to talk for quite a while about. But so when I was first researching my project, sorry, I was watching videos of people using controllers that had been adapted for them, and also people using the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And like the Xbox Adaptive Controller was huge. I think it almost definitely still is huge. And it was a massive thing for a lot of people, and I think it's amazing. But one of the problems I noticed was watching a YouTube video of this guy, and he was connecting I can't remember the name of the switch, like a switch where if you suck it presses one button, you put it in your mouth, you suck it presses one button, and you blow it presses another button. So he was using this, but to connect it, he had to connect it with like an earphone jack. And with his disability, he didn't have very good dexterity in his fingers, and he didn't mention it at the time because he was talking about how great his controller was, because he was able to play games again with it, which was fantastic. But he was struggling to put this jack in. I was thinking, how could I improve that connection? Because that can be about, because that he was able to do it, but there's a lot of people out there that might really struggle with that and might need help. And one of the things about universal design that I really feel quite strongly about is that I feel like if somebody needs like help to use your design, like I'm not sure how successful it is, and I don't want to be rude to other people who've designed anything else, but a lot of people, I think everyone in this world values their independence, and if somebody can use something independently, it can be quite a powerful thing. And I'm trying to keep that level of independence for somebody. I wanted to make sure that if I was to give my design to literally anybody, they could turn it on, use it, and then put it away again without any help. So I researched quite a long time on how to improve that, and one of the things that I realized was I've got a wee prototype here,
Oh, great.
and it's just a button, and there's 4 magnets, and I've discovered that you were able to transfer power and information through the magnets. So when you click them together, they draw themselves in to the correct positions, and then you can connect the loads of buttons together, however, in whatever shape you wanted, through just connecting the magnets. You can just place them next to each other and they'll drag themselves in. And I was quite excited when I discovered that you can transfer information through magnets. Wasn't sure that's possible, but yeah, just that being able to really easily set it up however you wanted it to. Because that's another thing with a adaptive controller that I quite liked, was that they could any of the users could put things in any way they wanted, and whether it's putting things on the floor or putting buttons only in if somebody couldn't use the, like, for example, left hand side, you could set up all your buttons on your right hand side so it's easy to access. So that's something I kind of wanted to emulate, but I wanted to make that putting it all together and plugging it all and connecting it, I wanted to make that as easy as possible because that's something that I identified that was wrong with the Xbox controller. So
Does your prototype rely purely on touch, or are there other senses involved?
uh, okay, that's something I hadn't thought about until now, all these months later. But yeah, it is mostly touch. Yeah, it is mostly touch. I can't think of any other ways it could be. But yeah, there's some there's maybe clutching at straws answering the question here, but on when you connect it all together, there's a like a control box that you connect it all to, and then you connect that to your computer or Xbox or whatever, and it has small LEDs on it to let you know that the buttons are connected properly, which is visual, but yeah, it's more of it's not really playing a game visually, if you know what I mean.
Why does the controller not have any joysticks? How does this work with different games and consoles and hardware and things like that?
Okay, well, it's really easy to answer the first question. The reason it doesn't have joysticks is purely because of COVID. Because I went into the design process desperate to make this work, and then COVID happened, and I was in the week before we were told we were going to get kicked out of the university and we wouldn't have access anymore. So I tried to get as much space 3D printing and making as many things as I physically could before we got kicked out. And at that point, I hadn't designed a joystick yet, and I'd focused on the buttons to try and get that initial prototype working before I moved on to something more difficult as a joystick would be. So when we eventually got kicked out, I lost the ability to make prototypes of joysticks, and also another big part of my process was give a wee shout out to Alistair Napier at DJ CAD. He helped me a lot with the coding of it. I'm not the best coder in the world, and if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been able to get it to work at all. And I did manage to get it work, but like, yeah, in the end, because of COVID, it just wasn't possible to get it to fully work. So the joysticks kind of fell to the wayside in an attempt to get it as on point as possible. But I think if I was to go at it again, there would be the plan was always to make joysticks, and I would have liked to have made them, but again, not having the opportunity was kind of kicking the teeth. And to answer the second part of the question, it, as I said earlier, it technically doesn't work at the moment because it wasn't fully coded and programmed. But the plan was to get the prototype to work with PC. So with it's going to be a long-winded answer again, but with each button had an address, like an IP address, and that address would then be able to be applied to a key on the keyboard. So then, so for example, if you're using the arrows on your keyboard, you press up, but then that button that you would have that button attributed to it. So that was the original plan, just to get it to work on PC, and then I always wanted it to get it to work on Xbox and PlayStation, but again, overall, if COVID had never happened, I probably wouldn't have had time to do that before the degree show, but I would have liked to have done it. And then when COVID happened, it just made it impossible.
That's amazing. I mean, thanks so much, Ewan. That was super interesting to sort of get a brief, amazing synopsis of your practice and what you've been doing over the last, year and a half, basically. So thanks so much for your time.
No, thank you.
No worries at all. I mean, Lucy, do you want to say any final words as well?
Just that was really interesting, and thank you for coming along and talking to us.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that somebody's interested in it.
We're all interested. Don't doubt yourself. So with that, that's our Design Unlocked finished for tonight. We hope you can join us next week for the next interview in the YPC's Design Unlocked series with a brand new designer. Thanks. Bye.